Welcome to Marketplace Tech Bytes, our weekly review of some of the biggest stories making headlines across the industry. I'm Safo, and this week, for the first time, we got hard data on how people and companies are adopting artificial intelligence tools. It was a big week for Nvidia. It faced new pressure from China while joining forces with Intel, and major Hollywood studios sued a Chinese AI firm over copyright infringement. I'm joined by our regular contributor, Anita Ramaswamy from The Information. Welcome, Anita.
Hey, Nova. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Lots to talk about today.
Lots to talk about. Yeah, before we do, as always, we're going to start with our Bite of the Week. This is where we have our guest give us the number that tells us everything about the week in tech. Anita, what's your number this week?
The number is 700 million. That's the number of people who use ChatGPT every week, according to OpenAI.
Wow, that's a big number. And let's start with where you got that number. Both OpenAI, ChatGPT owner OpenAI and Anthropic, which runs Claude, they both released reports on how their users are employing chatbots. And there are early signs of real divergence, not just among young and old, but geographic disparities, economic disparities. We learned that businesses adopting AI are more often automating tasks instead of augmenting what workers are doing. So in short, there is, in fact, lots of data to sift through. And Anita, I'm wondering what from the two reports really stood out for you?
I think the biggest thing, Nova, is that there's a distinction that we're seeing in the usage on OpenAI and their models versus Anthropic. It seems to be that, there's a lot of people individuals, consumers, like everyday people who are using ChatGPT, whereas Anthropic has taken a bit more of a business focus to some of their usage. And so OpenAI did this survey based on 1.5 million users over about a year. They tracked, usage, and they found that the big usage category for ChatGPT was people asking the model for practical guidance on everyday questions. So this is like how-to advice, tips on working out, things like that. Whereas the Anthropic survey was actually focused on businesses and how they were using the capabilities. And Anthropic's tools tend to be better known for tasks like coding and sort of the workplace uses that we see.
And the difference in how these two tools are being used, is that just a matter of marketing?
To some extent, yes. And it's a matter of, the strategy and how both of these firms have decided to sell their product. I mean, both are selling to enterprises. There is a ChatGPT for enterprise product, and a lot of different AI apps are built on top of ChatGPT. So in some ways, it's just a strategic difference. But even within just the data from ChatGPT, which is a lot bigger than Anthropic in terms of the number of users, it was interesting to see some of the distinctions about who's actually using it. One thing that stuck out to me also was that when ChatGPT first took off in around 2022, the vast majority of users had what they called a typically masculine first name. And fast forward that to today, now 52% of their users actually have a typically feminine name. Obviously, it's only directional data. It's not perfect, but I thought it was interesting to see that maybe there's been a little bit of a shift in the types of people who are using these chatbots and also the types of questions that they're asking.
Potentially, we could see, these different chatbots have particular niche audiences then, or niche users, or for if you want this, you go to ChatGPT. If you want that, you go to Claude, or etc.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of these AI app builders are doing, is they're sort of building overlays on top of these models that are, tailored to a specific flavor or specific use. Another big trend that, emerged in the Anthropic report was that a lot of businesses, like you said, are using AI not just to augment workers, but to sort of actually take over the tasks that they would be doing. So there are a lot of researchers who are being paid a lot of money right now to train AI models to act just like humans would within certain other apps. So teaching them how to use Salesforce, or teaching them how to use, some of these enterprise apps that people use for business in their corporate jobs.
The Anthropic report also had an interesting distinction between economic factors, advanced economies in certain parts of the world versus emerging economies, and how they're using Claude and its various tools. Can you talk about what those disparities were? What we're seeing early patterns of?
So what I was looking at was in the ChatGPT, the OpenAI report, actually, where they were saying that they're seeing a lot more usage around, poorer countries versus richer countries, and that's where they're seeing the majority of the growth. They didn't put any specific numbers to that, but that could also be interesting in the sense of like, a lot of people in the US and in richer countries have already started adopting these tools, and the growth is going to come from elsewhere.
Yeah, and interestingly, on the Anthropic side, advanced economies appear to be using its tools more and using it for augmentation, and emerging economies are using the tools, yes, but using it for full automation. So it seems to be like all these interesting, like, kind of subcategories of how these tools are getting adopted early on right now going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how they've sort of splintered and segmented in different ways, even though the models themselves are really quite similar.
And one last thing I wanted to mention is search. Fast growing category for ChatGPT, right? This starts to confirm something that we've all been thinking about a lot, which is this could be a serious competition for Google and other search engines.
Yeah, that's right, Nova. One of the biggest categories for ChatGPT usage was actually directly just to replace searches like people would do on Google. I think the eventual end path for a lot of this will come back down to commerce, and that's because OpenAI, Anthropic, they both talked a little bit about the idea that people will use ChatGPT as like a personal shopping assistant, and, I think that's super interesting because right now we have people paying for these subscriptions to ChatGPT Pro, and we have some businesses paying for it as well. But eventually we could see something like ads on ChatGPT. We could see something like a revenue share where if an agent or the model recommends that you buy a certain item, then maybe OpenAI gets a cut of that revenue. There's all sorts of different business models that this push into search could really unlock on the OpenAI side. And on the Google side, of course, that is sort of a challenge to their big business model, which is why they're investing a lot in Gemini and fleshing out these AI search overviews that you see when you go on google.com.
And that's on the consumer side of it. On the business and enterprise side of it, I know your publication, The Information, reported on yet another kind of frontier that both OpenAI and Anthropic are looking to cross. Tell us about what's happening there.
Which one are you talking about,
Oh,
Nova?
we're talking about AI coworkers.
Yes, that's right. So that's where I was talking about these researchers who are being paid to train models to do really specific things and use specific apps. So we see that there's PhDs, there's cutting edge research scientists who are working in the cutting edge of their field in a lot of hard science fields typically, and also in a lot of sort of typical white collar roles. And so that's where these human researchers are actually, it's interesting, are seeing their salaries rise and seeing demand for their skills go up right now, because that final frontier of that really cutting edge knowledge work and that cutting edge research is what AI is not very good at yet.
Operative term right now.
Right now.
So it's an all AI day here on Bytes today. So let's talk about Nvidia, the AI chip leader. We're used to lots of headlines about Nvidia, but there were a lot of headlines about Nvidia this week. One, China accused it of antitrust violations, which is eyebrow raising coming amid trade talks with the US. Two, China ordered its own companies to stop using Nvidia chips, which is kind of a big deal. And then three, Nvidia announced a blockbuster investment in rival chipmaker Intel. First of all, let's talk about the Intel news. What's that about?
Yeah, that's the newest headline that you mentioned. So already we saw the US government take a stake in Intel earlier this year. And the reason that it did that is because Intel has been struggling for a while. The company sort of missed out on the AI boom, was sort of late to a lot of the innovation that we've been seeing in the chip making space recently. And so they were in trouble. The US government took a stake in them. And now we have this news that Nvidia is buying about $5 billion worth of Intel stock. The market loves this. Its shares are up about 25% already. And it's just interesting to see all these different deals come together right around the same time to save this struggling chip maker.
In terms of Nvidia, what does it get, if anything, out of the Intel deal?
So for right now, details are still emerging. It looks like it is product partnerships. They're going to collaborate on, the manufacturing of certain chips. But at the end of the day, this is also a way for NVIDIA to position itself in proximity to the US government, in proximity to the Trump administration. And that has a lot to do with some of the conflict that's been going on over the trade talks and the tariffs. You mentioned the restrictions. It's funny because President Trump actually last month, he agreed to let NVIDIA export their H20 chips, which had previously been banned. But in return for that, he said the US government wants a 15% cut of any revenue that NVIDIA makes on selling those chips. And then, as you pointed out, Nova, now Chinese officials are telling Chinese companies not to even purchase those
Never
chips.
mind. Don't even buy those chips. And another set of chips as well, another design as well that is allowed to be sold in China. And just they're not allowed. China basically told its own companies, you can't buy these chips. So what's happening there? China seems to be putting the screws on Nvidia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's it's notable, I think, to see the way that Nvidia and Jensen Huang has been very present with talks. He's been present in Washington. He's been lobbying Trump quite a bit. It is a U.S. company at the end of the day, but they make a substantial portion of their sales, through Chinese customers. And that's also what this whole antitrust investigation seems to be about or related to. We saw that right after the U.S. sort of unveiled these export restrictions on certain chips to Chinese customers, the Chinese regulator then opened their investigation, and this was back in December, into Nvidia's acquisition of Mellanox. We only heard the news about that investigation and that Nvidia was actually found to be in violation of some antitrust provisions this week, but that had been in the works for some time and seems very coincidentally timed with the U.S. Escalation of that conflict.
Yeah, and Jensen Huang this week also said, the CEO of Nvidia, that there's a lot going on here that's not necessarily about Nvidia. It's about the bigger geopolitical issues, and they understand that at that company. Let's move on to our third topic, and that's Disney, Warner Brothers, and Universal all suing a Chinese AI company called Minimax. Even the name is not original. Think Miramax, the once powerful Hollywood production company. Well, anyway, the studios say Minimax is using characters straight out of Hollywood to generate videos through a service it calls, and I'm going to struggle to pronounce this, Halo AI. We found a Minimax clip that appears to showcase what the studios are complaining about. It appears to be a copy of the character Catwoman, a character owned by Warner Brothers, by the way. Let's take a look at the video. Yeah, no sound, but I mean, that looks like Catwoman to me, right? Is this a slam dunk case, Anita?
It's yet to be seen. This is really early days in terms of these lawsuits, but it's definitely not the first one of its kind. We also saw earlier this month, there was a similar suit from Warner Bros. And Disney and Universal, and they all sued Midjourney, which is another like AI image video generator, which is not a Chinese company, for using the IP of these three studios to train the model. And so I think we're going to see a lot of these similar lawsuits make their way through the courts, and there will be a lot of specific nuances as to each individual case. I mean, I'm thinking back to a bunch of lawyers or a bunch of authors rather, who had sued Anthropic in court for use of their copyrighted works and their books to train the Anthropic models, which that case shook out a little bit differently.
It did, in the sense that the court found basically that Anthropic can use their work, that it's fair use, as long as they had purchased the initial books. So yeah, it gets really nuanced. It's not necessarily a slam dunk as it may appear right away, because a lot of this case law in terms of AI and fair use of copyrighted materials is still kind of getting sorted out, isn't it?
Yeah, the fair use exemption is typically an IP law had been used for things like academic work. So it's like if you're a teacher, you're a professor, and you're using somebody's work to teach to your students, you're allowed to distribute that material to them, without necessarily compensating the original creator of that IP. And so the big fair use exemption is what AI companies have been arguing in court and using as sort of a loophole to be able to train their models on a lot of this data. And so how each judge and how each court interprets that, I think is going to be varied. And that's going to set the precedent for how AI is going to develop in the future.
And generally speaking, are we seeing AI companies rolling the dice with court rulings and fighting these lawsuits, or are they just saying, let's strike some deals?
We've seen a lot of deals, certainly. I think, Perplexity is a name that comes to mind. They're one of the AI search engines that has struck a lot of deals with different content publishers and agreed to pay them for use of their training content and training the model. But at the same time, we've seen other newsrooms go at it and really aggressively decide they're going to fight this, like the New York Times has decided in its lawsuit against OpenAI. So each publisher is also on a different page, and they're also really fighting it out in court in different ways, or fighting it out by signing deals. Well,
we'll have to leave it at that. That was a lot to cover this week. We'll see what comes next week at us. Anita Ramaswamy from The Information. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nova.
All right, and thanks to all of you for joining us for Marketplace Tech Bytes, our week in review episode. Jesus Alvarado produced this episode. I'm Nova Safo, and we'll see you next time. This is APM.